This episode is brought to you by Mortgage Workflow Partners and the Mastering Encompass series, both for users as well as administrators. You can find out all the information about it over at masteringencompass.com. Also, if you'd like to check out what we're doing on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to the channel using the @MasteringEncompass handle. And make sure you stay up to date on all the information, not just with podcasts, but also video content that we bring to you as often as possible. Now let's get on to the episode. Hey everyone, thanks for coming today. My name is Larry Bailey with Mortgage Workflow Partners, and I wanted to do this special event. Usually we do Tuesday meetings in the Mastering Encompass community. Usually it's every other Tuesday from 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern. This one's a lot different. This one's actually set up as a presentation, so you can't actually interact. This is actually built for me to just kind of put it out there. And what I've been finding a lot with folks is that there's a ton of misinformation around Encompass Web and even Encompass Desktop as it relates to Encompass Web. So I thought this would be a great moment to try to clear the air. I don't work for ICE Mortgage Technology. I don't represent the company in any way, shape, or form. I can only tell you what I know firsthand and what has really helped me help our clients over the last 2+ years, managing Encompass Web, managing the opportunities that Encompass Web provides, and most importantly, dispelling really a lot of information that's flat out wrong or misunderstood or old, and so on and so on. So what I want to do today with today's event is really talk about some of the myths of Encompass Web. For those that are going to the ICE Mortgage Technology Experience in March, and basically, what is it, in 4 weeks, 5 weeks, I'll be there. We're in booth 14. If you want to talk more about this, let me know. But the idea is that I want to get ahead of the conference just to kind of put it out there, this information. So there is an open Q&A here. So if you go to the tools, I do have Q&A that's open. I am watching for that. There's chat also. But if you have a question that you have, go ahead and either put it in chat, or if I ask a question, you can answer it into Q&A. So, so what I'd like to do for those that are on here is, what is Encompass Web to you? So when I go through and I talk to folks and I'm like, well, what is Encompass Web? For old folks like me, right? And I say old because I started using Encompass in 2004. Encompass Web first started as LO Connect, right? And that was the very first time Jonathan Corr stood on stage at some experience sometime with Sig Anderman and was like, hey, we're going to use LO Connect. And it was, as per usual, Ellie Mae was just way ahead of its time in terms of making sure that you always had the best tech. And so the idea of LO Connect started a long time ago. Converting to APIs started a long time ago. And obviously there was a huge, perhaps brouhaha about, moving, transitioning is the best way to say it, transitioning from SDK to API. And how does all that tie into Encompass Web? The reality is it kind of sort of does, but it's really mutually exclusive conversations in a lot of respects. So when we go from LO Connect, 7, 8 years ago, depending on your calendar, to Encompass Web today, it's really the fulfillment of that vision of being able to leverage something that's web-based and not EXE desktop-based. And so we one of the comments was, Eric says, for me, there's really no context for Encompass Web. You use it and that kind of a thing. And that's thank you, Eric, for that. And that's very common. There's almost a lack of context or a lack of understanding of how you can leverage Encompass Web in your day, because you're leveraging Encompass Desktop for everything, as you have been for the last 20+ years. So a lot of myths. First myth that I really want to bring up is that's really important here is there is absolutely zero need to move your teams to using Encompass Web. Now, when I say, the reason why I ask is, what is Encompass Web to you? Most people, tell me if I'm wrong here. Most people immediately think of the UI, Like taking Encompass Desktop and moving it to the web means that your users are literally logging into encompass.ice.com and that's where they work. That's what most people think. What I want to make sure everybody's clear is that that is not a requirement. The whole point of web, and it was a missed opportunity, I think, in language and presentation that we all had as ICE and as partners. This whole journey to the web kind of a thing was just, it could have been done differently and perhaps better. And by saying, hey guys, there's new functionality on the web that's going to be great for some of your teams, but you don't have to use it. Now, of course, how do you put all that into a catchphrase? It's hard. And so what I want to kind of dispel here, the first myth, is that you don't have to start using Encompass Web as a requirement. I've heard from 3 companies in the last 3 weeks who thought that they had to launch exclusively on web. It's just wrong, it's just false. Mortgage Workflow Partners, we've got 3 implementations going on right now, 2 for TPO, 1 for retail. They're going on desktop. Now, for the retail implementation, we're going to be talking about the 3 special teams that you can use in Encompass Web UI today, which is what we're doing. And that's the sales team, the secondary team, and post-closing team. And so when we talk about using Encompass Web UI, those are the teams that we're really focusing on. Everybody else is still using desktop, and so that's the takeaway here from this myth: is you don't have to move to the web UI, but you should investigate the best ways to move your team forward with your best practice workflow and the best technologies and tools available. Some of those technologies and tools are going to be on Encompass Web, so encompass.ice.com, and others are going to be on the desktop. And you're going to figure it out based upon your company and your workflow, what that is. Hopefully that makes sense for you and that kind of a thing. All right. This next one's going to be more of a gut reaction. The next myth I've heard recently is Encompass Web's not ready for prime time. It's not ready. Can't do it. Just not there yet. Maybe a couple more years it'll be ready. And I think that's a good myth to bust. The reality is right now, yes, you can use it. As I said a moment ago, you have to use it at the appropriate moment. Can you do an e-folder pop-out in Encompass Web UI right now? No. So who's that going to affect? Well, certainly probably your underwriting team, probably your processing team too, because it's very normal for your teams to want to pop out the e-folder on screen X and look at input forms on screen Y, and then, of course, have another screen or 2 besides that. But it's certainly ready right now for sales teams. It's certainly ready right now for secondary teams, and it's certainly ready right now for post-closing teams, 100%. And so at the end of this call, I'm going to go through and show you what I mean live. So hopefully you'll stick around and see that and let it inspire you, hopefully. But Encompass Web is 100% usable right now if you know what you're doing, and if you've got your settings configured, and more importantly, most importantly, your workflow configured. Okay, so myth number 3. Myth number 3 kind of ties into 2, where it's not ready for prime time. But I've heard from folks that are like, yeah, I checked it out, and you can't even do basic things. And so, what does that mean? That means that they're still thinking that this is 2018 or 2019, when legit you couldn't actually do basic things in LO Connect because it just wasn't ready for it. But as I'm going to show you live, I'll log in live and show you that you 100% can do that. You can run credit, you can run pricing, you can run AUS, dual AUS. You can run MI Center to do your best XMI. You can produce disclosures that actually runs Maven before they get disclosures. Sounds pretty complete to me. So that's really, again, the idea of how do you get your workflow into leveraging Encompass Web? That's a tough question. It's one of the reasons why I created my company, because we focus on that conversation intensely. We've always put workflow before technology. And so for us, it's common sense. It makes sense. We know how to leverage it. But for others, it is a tough call. So what I would recommend that you do is make sure that you're investigating with an open eye and an open mind to what's possible and then what's practical, meaning what's possible in Encompass Web settings and UI, and then what's really practical. Like what can we actually do when it comes to our workflow? Those kinds of things. The fourth myth that I want to talk about here is we can't use it like desktop. And so this myth of one that I come across a lot. Again, if you had the ability to raise your hands, I'd say raise your hands if you've got summary work input forms on your desktop, meaning you get workbook forms or summary forms or consolidation forms, whatever you want to call them, right? No matter what your position is, if you go into your Encompass desktop right now and you look at it, are you using something besides standard forms? Of course, the answer is yes. There's no way that you're not doing that. So then when you go look at Encompass Web as it is right now out of the box, you're like, well, I'm going to have to rebuild all this stuff. And that's where people usually stop. They look at Web and they're like, oh my God, I got to rebuild this whole big monster Frankenstein input form that's on desktop. And I have to redo that in Web. And no, you don't. And no, you shouldn't. And so one of the things that is an absolute myth that I deal with a lot personally, and the rest of my team does as well, is trying to really overcome this idea that whatever you have in desktop is going to pick it up, pop it down, and all of a sudden now it's going to work in Web. A, it doesn't work that way. B, you don't want it to work that way. It's a total myth. And so the idea here is that when you have a workflow in a piece of technology, when you get a different piece of tech, that doesn't mean you just repeat what you're doing. It just doesn't make sense. Because you're new to this new interface, it's very easy to think, well, I'm in Encompass, so we should be the same. It's the same loan file, right? So it should be the same, and that's just not the case. What I try to tell people is when they start to kind of push back and we're like, no, we're just going to stay in desktop. It's fine. They're working fine. What I try to explain is there's all these other companies that are out there that promote this web experience, this web UI experience. And they're successful in getting, for whatever reason, getting people away from Encompass because of the user interface. To which I say, here's the one in a career kind of move opportunity where you can recreate everything the business actually wants, and you get to stay in Encompass. So it's important to remember here that when it comes to the loan file, whether you're accessing it from desktop, from Encompass Web, from a third-party UI, or a proprietary piece of software, it's all hubbed into one thing, which is, of course, the loan file. And this might sound rudimentary, right? Like TPO Connect, Consumer Connect, again, Encompass Web, Encompass Desktop, proprietary sites, it doesn't matter. It's all going into one loan file. And the reason why this is important is because when you look at what you need to do from which source, people usually, when I talk to them, people usually say, oh, that makes sense, right? If I'm going to go order credit, I'm going to go into the credit UI from the credit vendor, and I'm going to do the work there. If I go into the title I'm going to do it there, or appraisal. Everybody should be nodding along, right? Everybody should be saying, yes, that totally makes sense. Okay, fine. So if I have you on that one, then why do we want people to be looking at things that they don't need to look at? And this gets us back to this desktop summary form experience. So typically what we do is we build a summary form for our processing team, or we build a summary form for an origination team, or an underwriting team, or a closing team. How many times do we share the same information on all these forms? Because we have no other choice. I'm going to show you a different choice in Web. Again, part of the end here, I'm going to show you how to use what's called card-based views. I've been advocating for card-based views for a very long time. By that, I mean 2 years. And it's something that's critically important for folks to understand, because when you have a widget, right, a piece of information, it's a pen, right? If I want to use this pen in different rooms of my house, do I recreate the pen? No, it's still the same pen. I just bring it to different rooms. And so when we go through workflow, we know in desktop, we're not recreating the field, but we have to recreate the control that the field's associated with because it's in a different place. But what if you didn't have to do that? What if you could actually legitimately and literally create the card that is going to be reshared to different people in a constructive way. That's card-based view. And the reason why this is important is because it changes the paradigm of how you're looking at your workflow. It changes the paradigm about how you're using Encompass. And so when I look at, like I got a demo of some other LOSs recently, and I looked at them, and these are web-based LOSs. And I said, yep, I can do that in Encompass. Yep, I can do that in Encompass. Yep, I can do that in Encompass. Why is this important for me? It's not because like I'm in love with staying in Encompass. It's because if that's where my company is, gang, if you've never been through an implementation of a new LOS while you're still a live company, you haven't lived life yet. You haven't had that done yet. And then God forbid the grass isn't necessarily even close to being greener on the other LOS. Now you're like, crap, should we go back? All that stuff is really bad. So in any event, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I don't want you to think the myth is we need to use Encompass Web like we use Encompass Desktop, and that's just a myth. You don't want to use it that way. You shouldn't feel like you need to use it that way. Now, does that mean you recreate your whole company? No. I want you to think about your workflow, and I want you to think about the appropriate place to use this new technology. Doesn't mean you have to change the whole company, but I guarantee if you look at your workflow and you look at how your teams are using Encompass, there'll be an epiphany moment where you're like, oh, I can put them on web because they only need to do this part. Or I can put them on web because their user interface for the workflow tasks is far better and far more efficient for them than anything else. So that's our fourth one. Our fifth one here that I've got is it's a very pessimistic kind of negative perception, but it's real, which is I've seen this before. No, thank you. I'm not interested. I've got other things to worry about besides worrying about another change level in my company. And I get that. I respect that. I seriously do. Like the idea of change sucks unless there's value. Like nobody likes to move, but if where you're living now sucks and you can move somewhere better, and it has a better quality of life and a better outcome, why wouldn't you do it? Usually it's fear. It's not having a clear plan, or maybe you just don't want to do it because you just don't have the energy to. I get all that. I really do. But the reality is, as I'm going to show you here, and Candace, thanks for the comment in the Q&A. I experienced 23 2 years ago, where Encompass Web was just starting to get to where it could keep growing. And that was pretty much ICE Mortgage Technology had poured a ton of capital and resources into making the dream of LO Connect become a reality of Encompass Web. Really, really cool. So I would encourage you to take a look at what I'm going to show you here in a minute. I want you to take it back to your team and go play with the concepts. I want you to go look at your workflows, and I want you to say, hey, you know what? I bet you I could do this little part and make my day a little bit better, or my team members' day a little bit better in what they're doing. Give a better quality of loan file based upon some small changes. And if you have a situation where you've been kind of band-aiding a workflow together because of different input forms and different concepts, and all they need to see is this one thing or do this one set of tasks, think about that person going to web or that department going to web. And some of the folks that are really easy to look at that is your secondary team. A lot of secondary teams, all they do is they hop into a loan, they go to secondary registration. Maybe they've got a custom input form to go to, but not always. And so Robbie says, we've got a few LOs testing right now with web, and they are excited about the card view and possibilities. Robbie, thanks for that feedback. I'm telling you right now, I've been showing team after team after team how card view works well for loan officers and loan officer assistants, and it's a no-brainer. It's literally a no-brainer. The one project that I was like that close to launching before some things changed at the company, everybody was rocking, and they were a tough crowd, to be honest with you. They had very specific, it was like a branch model, so everybody had their own thing. And I was able to consolidate everybody's own thing into one workflow that everybody was happy about, because I focused in on one very specific part of their workflow and put it in a mobile space for them, so they could do it from their phone if they wanted to, that kind of a thing. But most importantly, it was the speed. One of the things that we don't have in web today that every company has in desktop, except for maybe a handful out there in the world, are plugins. And so, of course, it feels snappier. For those that have seen me show my Encompass desktop, Mortgage Workflow Partners desktop, it's super snappy. And you're like, dude, why is that guy's Encompass so fast? It's because I don't have plugins. That's it. And so the idea of leveraging other parts of technologies that aren't they're not interacting with extra technology. Of course, it's typically going to be faster. It doesn't mean the workflow is appropriate. Doesn't mean it can do everything that you need it to do, but it does mean that it is different. So with having said all that, I want to show you, I want to go through and focus in on kind of a live demo. I'm going to show you a couple of ideas here on screen, if I can figure out how to do this properly. All right, so you should be, pull myself off the video, and we're sharing this. So if you go to encompass.ice.com right now, all right, you're going to plug in your client ID. Now, if you're assuming you're a super admin, you should be able to log in no problem. If you're not a super administrator, you might have to get permission from your super administrator, from your team. So once you log in as a super, of course, you'll get to this spot. If you guys haven't seen me go through this in one of the community meetings at Mastering Encompass, look it up. I'm sure there's plenty of replays where I've gone through all of these. If you would like to know how to do all this stuff and understand how to do this better, please sign up for our Mastering Encompass Admins Certification and Coaching course. You'll find out information about that at masteringencompass.com. All right, so let's get over into one thing I want to talk about: sales teams. Sales teams forever have been asking for a sandbox, whether it's for a new application or whether it's for an application in progress, and the borrower calls up or whoever calls up and the deal has to be restructured maybe 5 or 3 different ways. Now, there's a challenge with that, of course, because some companies then want to run AUS for this new scenario just to make sure it's going to work before they sell it to the borrowers. This is not going to solve for that. It's not about that. What this is about is being able to constructively show the borrowers what other opportunities they have based upon the scenarios that they want to go through. And so this example that you see on screen takes the place of back of the napkin kind of work. And when you go out and do this, you can have up to 10 of these guys. And you can see, if I zoom back in now, you can see kind of when I prepared the scenarios. So you can keep track for your borrowers. Why is this important for the sales team? Let me tell you, as a salesperson, the reason why this is important is because I can go into the situation and I can go edit the opportunity, and I can go in and update information as I need to, whether it's property information or loan information. And when I click, and I can pick different terms, I can pick different products, et cetera, this is going to hook up right to your PPE. And so when it comes in, this one has to be locked into Optimal Blue. And so when you come in, you can pick out your different products that you want, click add, and that's going to create additional scenarios for this opportunity that you can then now send out and distribute out to your borrowers as choices. The reason why this is important for the sales team is because anybody in sales knows the more options you give to your borrower, the more likely they feel like they're in control, even though they're all your choices. So the idea is also, if you're ever in a loan file, you can flip back and forth between loan file and opportunity. So if this opportunity was connected to a loan file, you can move back and forth in and out. Again, why is this important? Because in reality, what happens is I got the loan in, maybe it was disclosed, maybe it wasn't, but the borrower wants to keep moving things around. They're not sure yet, and you're not sure yet. So using opportunities, it gives you the chance to kind of get through that conversation. And then ultimately, if you want to determine eligibility, you can look at these different scenarios and you can see the details for if they qualify based upon the back of the napkin stuff or not. You can check the eligibility based upon the basic information you have. All this is rudimentary, right? If you've got another piece of tech that handles this, phenomenal. The one thing that is important again is if I'm in a loan file, I can easily go back and forth into it. Why is this important? Because I'm in Encompass Web. That's how this ties into today's conversation. Because as a sales team, one of the things that I need to do very easily is I'm going to take this off screen just to get to our testing loan. Because again, this is hooked into a live environment. So as a salesperson, I need to be fluid. Time is literally money. And when we go through and we look at loan files or loan information, one of the biggest complaints about Encompass Desktop that every person says in sales is they like cringe every time they have to open up desktop because of whatever, right? Whatever that reason is, whether it's the speed of opening or the ease of finding the loan that they need to find or to get to where they need to go. And so card-based view. So Robbie, I don't know if you use this to let you inspire card-based view. I hope you did. But for everybody else, what's on the left here is the ability to custom nav the workflow based upon channel. And so one of the things that you can do, assuming you don't have multiple persona syndrome in your environment, you can make sure that only a particular persona has access to this specific custom input form. This is a single input form, gang. And so if we look at what comes out of the box, you'll see that you've got all of your standard input forms listed here, and they look the same, right? So if we go to borrower summary origination, you might look at this input form and go, yeah, that kind of looks familiar. The difference between this, of course, and desktop is it's fully responsive. So if I wanted to kind of shrink this in, I can go over and now it's going to basically flip as soon as I put it down into a certain size. Now, there is no one in the world that's going to do this on their phone. If they are, gold star for them. It's just not going to happen. And so what we want to think about is what is the best way, going back to what I said earlier, what's the best way to bring the best tools for your team where they are and for what they need to do? And for your sales teams, you're going to want to do something like this, where you can give them a quick summary and they can go through the file basic information with their borrowers very quickly. Or if you want to go down and run credit, you can come over here and check it out. And if you're worried about trigger information, you can pull out contact information before you order the credit. Get pricing whenever you need to, review liabilities, your total cost. If you want to go through the full 1003 URLA, including lender, here it is. From a training perspective, you can't tell me that this is not easier than desktop. You just can't. I'm gonna ignore you if you do, because it's just not the truth. There's no way that I can take a person that has limited training on Encompass, show them this and fail. Not going to happen. Encompass Desktop, higher chance of failure because there's a lot to look at. And then lastly, what I did in here under disclosure readiness is I took there's some tools out there in the marketplace that use some third-party tech, and basically what I did with this was in a special way through field calcs, I made sure that a file was ready for disclosures. Now this is going to mean something to everybody a little bit differently, but the idea is I was able to take an ops manager who was adamant that they would never allow a loan officer to be able to self-disclose. Doing this kind of work, loan officers are now self-disclosing. Now, not every loan type, right? There's certain loan types and certain loan programs that still have to be disclosed by a disclosure desk. But it was an 80-20 rule. 80% of the loans now can be self-disclosed by LOs. Oh, and by the way, you can also automate your disclosures with Encompass Web. Very important part I'm talking about here is not the actual web UI, but when I've been talking about Encompass Web, in my head, I've not been talking about just UI. I've also been talking about settings. So if you're not leveraging your notification templates, your scheduler templates, and your workflow rules for your desktop settings right now, you're completely missing out. And this again is a part of my myth busting here for Encompass Web today, was to remind you that when it comes to thinking about Encompass Web, you need to think about Encompass Web everything. Everything. And that includes for settings. So if you're an admin, you should be learning this, you should know this, you should be implementing this into some testing, into your workflow. If you're not an admin watching this, you need to talk to your team to find out why you're not using this, because you need to. Lisa asks, is Quick Qual for LO a custom form that you have built? Yes, Lisa, that is all mine. That's my creation, my imagination. Feel free to let it inspire you, right? It's something that I came up with because I needed to come up with something quick for a loan officer to do pre-quals. You can see I don't have a very high imagination bar. Naming conventions are not my strong suit. I'm a very literal person, Lisa. But anyway, that's what it is. So anyway, when we come through here, that's important for me to make sure you understand. All right, so let's go through. I want to go back through web, because one of the things I promised you was the ability to go through the steps, because going back to one of the myths, you can't, it's not ready, right? You can't do everything that you want to, that kind of a thing. And so yeah. By the way, I don't know if you're paying attention, but I just hit the back button, I hit the refresh, and it brought me right back into the loan file. Again, it's internet, so you can control this via URL. Something else that comes up quite a lot. You're welcome, Lisa. Can you open up more than one loan at the same time? And the answer is no, and that's intentional. I've seen other LOSs that are web-based where you can do that under the same session. And I said to those teams, I'm like, you understand what you did, right? You understand that you just set up a user for a probable problem, because they're going to forget what tab they're on, and they're going to not realize that they just did something in the wrong file. Could you open up more Encompass on the web instances with more than one tab? Yes, you can do that. So be mindful that, again, it's the internet, right? So you can pretty much do a lot of things. Just be very careful about how you leverage this in workflow. Candace asks, tips and tricks for keeping track of workflow rules. Not as easy to track down what you've done on desktop. I'm using tags. That helps, but are there better options? It's an interesting question. It's more of an admin question, Candace, than it is a myth thing. But just to answer you real quick, you should be creating workflow rules based upon need, and that need should be tied to a request, and that request should be tied in your tracking platform. Right? So in terms of searching, if that's really what your question is, like, we can, in desktop, we have some native analysis tools, and we also have some third-party plugins that can do some analysis. If that's your real question, ICE does not have anything yet for an analysis tool for web business rules. Not yet. But they know it's needed. Trust me, they know. So hopefully I got your question answered. So when we come in here, one of the things that I like to talk about is in the E folder. Oh, hang on a second. Actually, I'm going to open up a brand new Encompass, because you guys are going to want to see enhanced conditions, because that's part of the conversation also. So let me get over here into enhanced conditions, into a file. This is no longer a live environment. This is my environment, so I can play around a lot over here. So go to pipeline. And by the way, like I said earlier, I've got this Encompass open and I've got this Encompass open. These are two different versions, two different client IDs, two different Encompasses. Oh, you got it, Candace. Glad you got it. So if I'll come down to the enhanced conditions loan I've been using as tests and demos. And the reason why I want to come here is because when you have enhanced conditions enabled, you probably have new doc viewer enabled, and that's really important to have. So again, these are kind of prerequisites to get the best experience with Encompass Web. So what I want to show you here is when you go into the E folder, these buttons are going to expand, and so everything should look familiar, but it is a little bit different. And what's important to understand is in the disclosures workflow, this is why you can let your loan officers do it, because you have the ability. I don't have one-time passcode, but you have the in this environment. See, I told you can't do it without OTP. The loan audit will do not only your data integrity audit for your loan file, but also do Mavent. So that's important to do. Documents is the same as what you're used to with documents, and sender and recipients, again, needs one-time passcode enabled. Why is this important to show you here? Because, gang, you can actually do all of this lights out for all borrower repairs. And so one of the myths is you can't do stuff in web. Well, no, you can. You just have to make sure it's configured properly. Eric said they had a lot of problems with enhanced conditions at one time, but we had problems with new doc viewer and had ICE move us back to old doc viewer. So I don't really know, Eric, the problem. I'd love to hear about it more in the community. So if you want to start a thread in masteringencompass.com community, Eric, about it, new doc viewer, I'd love to hear it. I've only had one client in the last 2-3 years go back to old doc viewer, and it was because users were complaining about problems. What was really weird was in that company, only half the users were having the problem. So, and when we got them on a support call, they couldn't really show us exactly what the problem was. They couldn't recreate the problem. It was just really a training issue, and it was a change issue. So Candace says, I agree. We went through revised rules, schedules, naming conventions, help keep track. Okay, cool. Here's a question. Will Encompass Web stay logged in as long as a tab is open, or will he kick you out? It will kick you out after about 5 minutes of inactivity. ICE was trying to move that to 15 minutes. I don't think they were successful, but I could be wrong. I've never put a clock to it. But it will give you a pop-up that says you're about to be logged out for inactivity. So I imagine you're thinking about that because on desktop, sometimes people just kind of hang out in their files. So then we think about this third-party tech to go in and basically boot people after a certain amount of time. So web will actually do that. It'll kick them out of the loan, kick them out of Encompass, done. It does give it to users the same experience, whoever asked that question. So there we go. Was I supposed to do this? No comment. So going back through here, that's the disclosure part. And of course, the request send here is like it is. If you've got new doc viewer turned on, you can also do the automatic request and send through workflow rules. And then you can also turn on automatic retrieval through desktop settings. And this is really what I'm trying to explain. Like today's not a training session, but I really want to advocate here that Encompass Web settings and Encompass desktop settings are one Encompass. And that's part of the myth today is some people think that these are two separate concoctions of programs, and they're not. It's one cohesive set of experiences and settings. And your job as an administrator or your job as a user to talk to your administrator is to help them understand that these things work cohesively together. That's really what it's all about. When we come over into services, that's conditions, my bad. When we come over into services, part of the other part that people talk about is if you've got, MI Center, if you have Optimal Blue turned on or Poly turned on for Best X for MI, that's great. But it doesn't actually put everything into the loan file that you need. One of the biggest complaints I hear about those other solutions is the lack of ability to put in the factors directly in for your PMI, right? And so if you use the MI Center and you follow this for Best X, it actually will import the factors for MI. That's a great feature. Jackie says, we get that logout message in web even if we're actively working. Yeah, Jackie, I hear you loud and clear. And again, that's been reported to ICE. So I'd encourage you to also report it. Like, don't think like you're okay with it. Like if it's bothering you, say something. The last thing I wanted to really talk about here in terms of usage was when we do go into services, the underwriting center. I don't know why I keep clicking the wrong thing here. This is a huge deal for sales teams. The ability to run dual AUS is huge. So now, assuming that you've got LPA and DU turned on in your environment, you can run them both simultaneously. More importantly, when they do get run, you have a rep and warrant tracker in here so everybody can see the rep and warrant relief from the different AUS engines for the specific information. Gang, these are specific fields that you can use in administration. These are also specific fields that you can use for disclosure readiness. Just saying. So when we look at, what's available in here, right? That's what I wanted to talk about. Under tools, sorry, I'm going to go back to forms here because I added it here. I don't know if you've seen this before, but to kind of sum this all up, when we talk about cohesive use between desktop and web, obviously when we go look in this particular task for reviewing the 1003, it gives you a task workspace. You see this task, this kind of interface over here in desktop. You don't see this interface over here in desktop. So it doesn't mean you can't use it. You can use it. You don't have to use web workflow tasks to do the job. But one of the things that your team will love about you if you do use workflow tasks is the ability for a task pipeline for your teams to manage what is due as well as what is overdue that's been assigned to them. It allows you to add comments, things like that. So if you're not, first of all, if you're not aware of all this, now you are. If you're not leveraging any of this in your company today, what's the plan to get it to be leveraged? That's really the messaging for here. Because when I go to, I'm just being really straight. The reason why I was inspired to do this meeting today and this presentation today is because I've met with companies, executives, like top level CEOs of publicly traded mortgage companies, and they're like, I want that. And then when I go in to do the work, everybody in the workflow is like, can't use that because our workflow is special. No, that won't work because that's not how we do it. And this idea of changing the way you think about how you process and work with your situations, whether it's based upon a web UI or based upon using opportunities or based upon leveraging the workflow management tools with your desktop settings, it's going to take time, gang. It's going to take time. As Candace said earlier in the comments, like she first saw the aha moment. Okay, I should start working on this 2 years ago. It's pretty much when I first really started laying into this, when we were at the experience and I started seeing what's possible. And that's when I started showing teams how to start leveraging web for sales. Only until 24.3 when they updated secondary registration tool. Because if you go into that, by the way, I didn't show that on here, but yeah, let's go do it. We got a couple minutes. So the reason why I want secondary to come in here is because they can come into a file. And if you're in secondary, you're probably not going into the loan too much. But when you do need to go into the loan, you want to make sure that you can quickly go in and you can quickly get to that secondary registration tool. And this is where, again, if depending on how you have your personas set up, if they have a unique persona, you could get them to go to the specific input form instead of going down to secondary registration. Now, you might not think that's a big deal for what I just did. I don't know. But the idea here is that if I go in and do a new lock or I have to manage a current lock, that's what is very similar to what desktop looks like. And you have the ability to expand and collapse these sections. So, part of the allure for web is easy in, easy out. They can go right back to the pipeline and go into the next file, right? Whether they're checking something out or they are maintaining information. For your post-closing teams, it's all about tasks. Every single one of them, it's all about tasks. So when we go in here, the post-closures will see what tasks are due at some point in the future, like for final docs or title or recorded mortgage, whatever, deed of trust, versus stuff that's overdue. And then you have the ability to track comments. This is why this is entirely powerful for a post-closing team, because post-closing is nothing but tasks, just nothing but tasks. So when you go through, The idea is to make sure that you understand which technology is being leveraged best for your team, in what way. Are there any other myths that anybody's come across that you'd like to talk about? So we've got a few minutes left here of the presentation. People have been using the Q&A pretty well, which I appreciate. Thank you very much. So are there any other questions, anything else I can show here that would be helpful for the group to talk about? Encompass Web isn't ready, or Encompass Web, we have to move to the web. I don't know if anybody's talked about that, but that is the reality. I've heard from people where they're being told they have to go there. Eric adds, will they be adding anything similar to dashboard views in web version? So it's a really great question, Eric, and to which I would ask you, why do you need that? Now, I'm going to imagine some answers while you're typing, but typically we use dashboards because we want to be able to know what to do next in which file, right? And that what to do next is based upon a field change or a milestone change or something that happened, and it's time for us to do something. Isn't that a task list? Now you might say, but Larry, but I've got 4 or 5 different snapshots on my dashboard. And yes, I need to know when this, I'll use disclosure desk because it's easy to imagine. But on this snapshot, we've got initial disclosures due, not yet sent. We've got this one over here, disclosures sent, not yet signed. And I want to keep track of these things. So to which I say those are all workflow tasks. And again, you might say, well, Jesus, everything's a workflow task, to which I would say, yeah, you're right. It is. So I don't know ICE's game plan on that, but it's certainly worth a conversation. So Eric adds, with my role, I run a lot of pipeline views, dashboards. Give me a quick. Yeah. So Eric, for you, probably web is not your best place to do work, right? Like why? Again, this is this conversation, right? Like, why do we want to take what we have in desktop and just think we want it in the web? Because it's like, well, can it, right? It's just a general conversation. But the answer is, I would look at why you're asking. And in this particular case, you have to track, dozens of files in different statuses simultaneously in one dashboard. There's only 2 places in the world that you can do that. Number one's on dashboards, and number 2 is in your own BI platform, whether it's Power BI or whatever, right? Some type of BI dashboard to give you this kind of a thing. Encompass Web is not designed for that, nor do I ever, me personally, I don't see it's the best place for it. I think Encompass Web's highest and best use is making sure that when I have to work on something in a lone file, I can come in and do it as effectively and as efficiently as possible without having to go all other places, with a great layout for a workflow, with easy to use functionality and quickness in getting my stuff done. So hopefully that answers your question. I think it's a great question. And I think it's one of those things that we have to keep coming back to is, where is the best place? Eric says, but tasks may be a good option if I could turn those into tasks. Right, exactly. And this is the kind of thing that I could tell you I go through personally. As a company, we manage right now, I think we've got 30 something projects running simultaneously across our team members. And, how do we track? We use Basecamp, and I use Basecamp. It's called Haystack. It's erroneous details, but it lets me know what I have to worry about, and everything else that's going on, I don't really care about. I mean, I care, but it's not for me to worry about. I've got team members to worry about it. But for the stuff that I have to worry about, it's on my Haystack to be aware of, not an email, on a Haystack, and that links over to the thing that I need to be aware of. That's like a task list, right? And so when we think about the pipeline and we think about the tasks here, these are the things I have to worry about specifically as it relates to a particular file. Everything else that's going on in these loans, I'm sure is important, but it's not for me to worry about because that's not my focus. Somebody adds, what about seeing processor load base and seeing who has what, managing that? Yeah, again, anonymous user. I think that's the answer, going back to what I said a moment ago. Highest and best use for the right technology in the right circumstance. We don't need to replace dashboards. Like, if dashboards is doing it for you, stay to dashboards. It's okay. Desktop's going to be here, gang. Again, that was the first myth I tried to address for you. Desktop's going nowhere. Can't say never, because nothing's ever never. But ICE Mortgage Technology, I'm on the partner advisory board. I'm very close with all the product managers and executive leadership, and it's very clear that again, this whole journey makes people feel like they have to leave, which is why journey was just it should have been chosen or said a different way. It's about implementing new technology that's now available and implementing it in the best way possible for you and your workflow. Desktop is not going anywhere. So hopefully I drove that nail down hard. Again, some people would say, for the person who asked about the sync processor load base, some people would say they actually don't like Encompass dashboards at all. They only work in their own proprietary BI visualizer. Okay, whatever. Or some people don't even do that at all. They use a third-party piece of tech and they pre-program the load balance, and the tech just assigns who it needs to go to. Just whatever works for you. So I hope today's been super useful. I do. I appreciate you guys' time. If you have any questions about this replay is going to be up on masteringencompass.com. Check it out. If you know anybody who wants to watch it, just tell them to sign up. It's free. It's open to anybody. And if there's more information that I've caused you to ask that I didn't cover in today's event, please post the questions there in the community. I'd be glad to ask. And then also, again, every other Tuesday, we meet at 4 to 5 p.m. In the community. Again, that's a free call. It's more of a community-based call, so you can interact more lively. And then last but not least, all this stuff I train admins on how to use and how to leverage. So if there's anything I can ever do to help you grow, or anything my company can help you to do your company, head over to masteringencompass.com. Check it out. All that information's there. Let's see. We got one more comment. It says, Christine says, super helpful. Thank you. Christine, thank you for coming. I appreciate your time. And thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. See you now.